You know, sometimes when I read the stories that we're going through in this series, I start thinking the people in Israel, they're just stupid. I mean, some of the things that they do you just think to yourself, man, how could they be so incredibly dumb? And this is one of those stories. Today we're going to tell the story about the children of Israel and the golden calf. And then I remember to do what I advised you guys in the first episode, to start seeing things from their perspective, to see it from their point of view. And when you start looking at it from their point of view, it changes things. For instance, look at the kind of people these are. They don't have a Bible, they don't have anything sophisticated as far as technology or anything else. In fact, even for their day, they're not a sophisticated people. They are like primitive people, like people that live in some jungle tribe today. And they've got a lot of gods and a lot of superstitions, and they don't understand how things work, and they're poor, and they do without. And so they just wanted to get free from Egypt. And then along comes this old guy, and the plagues and the Passover and the Red Sea. They are led out to the water, bitter water, at 3 days, and then food. And they start getting fed whatchamacallit. They don't know how this works. It just happens. As you go through these series of events, and they finally end up at Mount Sinai, it's pretty amazing, but this is not a group of people that are sophisticated and sitting there thinking this thing through the way that we do. And so I want to encourage you to think along with me and see this from their perspective, and to understand that things are a little bit different than you might imagine. Think of it this way. Imagine that somebody came along today and went to a country where there was slavery, and then they just called along everyone who had the same last name. All right, everyone named Smith. You have common ancestors, and so you guys all come over here. And it'd be like weird. Okay, well, we'll go together because we all have the same name. So this people, this children of Israel, they're Israelites. They're all people with the name Smith, or in this case, the name Israel. And so they go out into the desert, and here's where we find ourselves. Now, I want to teach you a word. Maybe some of you know this word already, but the word is polytheist or polytheism. And that means, poly means many, and theism or theist means gods. These were polytheists, these people. They had many gods. And they just went to the God that did whatever they needed done. And a monotheist is a person who has only one God, which is what we all say we are, because we only have one God, and that's Yahweh. Now, here's the thing. These people are still polytheists, even though they followed Yahweh out into the desert, and they're camped at Mount Sinai, and they've seen these amazing things take place. They're still polytheists. They haven't gotten rid of the gods. And here's the other thing. When we start thinking we're that much different than they are, and they're different than us, let me just encourage you to consider this. Many of us, even many of us who call ourselves Christians, are in fact polytheists. And we're going to tell the story, and then we're going to come back to this idea. But I'm going to give you a few minutes of discussion time, and I wonder if you can think of or name some other gods, some sort of false gods that we may have in our lives these days. as you may remember from the last time, they got to Mount Sinai. There was fire and smoke and the sound of trumpets, very loud trumpets, getting louder and louder. The earth shook. The scene was so tremendous and so amazing and so frightening that the people were horrified. And after God had spoken to them from the mountain, they begged Moses, "You go talk to God and leave us, and we'll stay here. We'll do whatever you and God work out." And so Moses does that. Now, this is where it gets kind of confusing, because if you try to read this through in your Bible, you'll see that Moses goes up the mountain, Moses comes down. It's hard to keep all of it sorted out, and I'm going to skip over a lot of the detail of that. Also, you'll find that when Moses goes up in chapter 21 to the top of the mountain and starts getting laws, then 21, chapter 22, chapter 23, all of these chapters are just laws and laws and laws. And so it records what God told Moses while he was up there. Then in chapter 24, Moses comes back down the mountain and he starts telling the people things. They build an altar, they sacrifice. And so there's a lot of up and down going on. This next time, God has Moses take the elders and a man named Hur and Joshua and Aaron, and they go to the foot of the mountain together. And then Moses goes up a little bit further with just Joshua, and then he drops off Joshua, and then he goes on up into the cloud and disappears from everyone's sight. Moses is up there for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, after all of this up and down, let me just say this. If you're reading it, it'll get confusing again because you go on for several more chapters of laws and laws and laws and laws. And so it's easy to sort of lose track of the storyline. Okay, so now Moses is up there. Now, can you imagine? The people see this sight and they're really frightened, and Moses goes up, and after all these rules about just we'll kill anybody that touches this, and then Moses is gone for a day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and finally, after nearly 6 weeks, you got to be thinking, this guy isn't coming back. And that's exactly what they thought. This guy's been up there for 40 days and nights. Even if he took food and water with him, he'd probably be dead of starvation by now. I mean, he'd be dead of thirst by now. He couldn't have carried that much up with him. And that's assuming God didn't kill him because he did something dumb or whatever while he was up there. And so remember now, these people they worship many gods, and now they're just kind of sitting in the middle of the desert and they don't really know what to do. So they get Aaron. And Moses' story in Exodus 32 says that they gathered around Aaron. And if you were to read it in the Hebrew, you'd see that they didn't just gather around Aaron, they sort of gathered against Aaron or over Aaron. It's like they sort of got in his face. Now, can you imagine? You got 2 million people, and everybody's been waiting now for 6 weeks, and they're kind of up in Aaron's face. And they go, all right, here's the deal. We're making you the leader. We want you to make a goal. Here's what they say. Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. Let me just say this, too. Some of your Bibles say gods in the plural. Whenever it talks about God in the Old Testament, not every time, but most of the time, it says God and not Yahweh or the Lord or something. When it says the word God, it's usually in the plural. So it should be just make us a God there. Probably not plural. Okay, so Aaron makes them a god. He gets all of their gold and jewelry and melts it all down. He takes a tool and he fashions it into the shape of a golden calf. And then he says, here's your God, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Isn't that interesting that he says, this is the one that brought you up out of Egypt, this golden calf now. And then he says this. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf. An altar is like a big barbecue pit. Okay, it's where you put a sacrificed animal. You kill an animal and prepare it to be barbecued, basically, and then you'd eat the barbecued meat. So just think of a big grill, a big rotisserie kind of a thing. And he builds this altar, And then he says, tomorrow there will be a festival to Yahweh. You know, Yahweh is our God. He's the invisible. He's still in the smoke up on the mountain. And so what Aaron has done is, yeah, he made them an idol, but he named it Yahweh. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so then the people get up early the next morning, and this phrase is important. They sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings, and afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. I said that's important because that same expression is found in the New Testament, and we'll talk about that at the end, that they got up early in the morning and began to indulge. They partied, basically. Okay. So then, meanwhile, back up on the mountain, God sees all of this going on, the real God, Yahweh, and he starts telling Moses, and he tells Moses exactly what's happened. He even tells him it's a calf, and these people are no good, and they've turned away already. And God says, you know what? I've seen enough of these people. They're stiff-necked, they're hard-headed, I'm tired of them. I'm going to just wipe them all out and start over with you, Moses, and I'm going to make the whole group of people come from you. Well, Moses says no. Now, isn't that remarkable? The Moses who didn't want this job, the Moses who didn't want to lead, doesn't want to be going through all of this. Now, all of a sudden, Moses is kind of on board. And God even says, this people you brought up out of Egypt. And so then Moses turns it back and says, no, these are your people, and you brought them up. But then Moses says something remarkable. Moses says to God that how could you want to look bad in the face of the Egyptians and the other peoples? Listen to these words. Why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought up out of Egypt with your great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and don't bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore, I'll take your descendants, make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Then Yahweh relented and didn't bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. So God changed his mind. Well, he apparently changed his mind from what he had told Moses. And remember, Moses is the one that wrote this story. So Moses goes back down the mountain. Now, one of the parts I left out is that God wrote the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of stone, front and back. 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of stone. But God carved it out with his own finger out of the stone. Moses wasn't up on the mountain with a hammer and a chisel, tink, 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 tink. No, God actually carved out on the stone with his own finger this thing. So Moses is carrying down what would surely be the most incredible piece of engraving in the history of engraving. And Moses comes down and he finds Joshua partway down the mountain. And Joshua goes, hey, it sounds like there's a party or the sound of war in the camp. Moses goes, nope, it's not the sound of victory or defeat. It's not war. That's a party you're hearing, my friend. And so then they start down the thing. And sure enough, Moses sees everybody partying and they're, eating barbecue and hanging out and having a big old time. They're like a bunch of kids that are getting a day away from their parents or something. Moses is just furious, especially since he's just stuck up for them. And he could have had a whole nation made for himself. Moses takes the 2 stones, he throws them on the ground, they break all over the place. Then Moses comes down, he gets the golden calf that they've made, and he melts it down. Then he grinds it up into a fine powder. He scatters the powder onto the surface of the water, and he makes the Israelites drink the water with the gold in it from the calf. Then he turns to Aaron, his brother, his big brother, and he says, what did these people do to you to make you do something this stupid? And Aaron says, you know these people, man, they got all up in my face and you know how they are. And so he just tells them what happened. But then he kind of modifies the end of the story. And he goes, so I got all the gold together and I threw it into the fire and out popped this little calf. Can you believe it? Like magic, Moses. Moses, not quite that stupid. So Moses sees the people, and I love this. He sees the people running wild, and that Aaron had let them get out of control. So they became a laughingstock to their enemies. And he stood at a distance at the entrance to the camp, and he said, anybody that's still for Yahweh, come over here to me. Now, it's interesting that Moses has this interest in what their enemies think of them, and we'll talk more about that in the follow-up part. Okay, so when Moses says, anybody that's for Yahweh, come to me, who comes to him but the Levites? Now, Levites is one of the 12 tribes of Israel, descendants of Levi. It's also Moses and Aaron's kinfolk. Moses and Aaron are Levites. So all of the Levites come over to him, and Moses tells them this. He says, God says for you to strap a sword on your side and go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor. And so the Levites did this, and they killed 3,000 people more or less that day. Can you imagine? Put a sword on, go out, kill your neighbors, slaughter them. And they killed 3,000 people in one day, just going throughout the camp, randomly killing people. They didn't say, did you bow down, or are you part of the thing? No, or if they did, we don't know about it. And then Moses says this, you've been set apart to Yahweh today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day. Amazing. We'll take a look at this in the follow-up too. Now, the next day, Moses says to the people, you've done a great sin, and I will go up to Yahweh, and maybe I can make an atonement for sin. Maybe I can get you out of this. So Moses went back up, and he says, these people have sinned really badly, and I'll tell you what, if it's necessary, take me out of your book. And God says, I'm going to strike some names out of the book, all right, but just the ones that are guilty. But he goes, don't worry about it. I won't kill them all now. Go back to the people, and those that need to be punished will be punished ultimately. And then a plague swept through because of what they did. So some of them were killed by the Levites, and some of them were killed by a plague, but the people in general were spared because of Moses reaching out to God. We will see another little bit more about this from Deuteronomy, which is also part of the Torah, but we'll talk about that in an upcoming segment. But there's the story. The group of people who disobeyed God, and again, I always thought, just how stupid can you be to forget God this fast? But they did, and it's kind of understandable when you look at it from their perspective. And when you look at it from Moses' perspective, who's been on the mountain this whole time, I mean, he's in the middle of getting the law from God, and God says, well, you got to go down and check on your people. By the way, I'm going to just wipe them all out and make a new group from you. Seeing it from Moses' perspective is a weird thing. And so, all right, why don't you guys take a quick break, and then we'll come back and look at what this has to do with us. So the people are not stupid. The people are like we are. Moses has been gone now for 6 weeks. What are you supposed to do? Just sit here in the middle of the desert and just wait forever? Yeah, they're getting food, and yeah, they're getting water, and they're doing okay as far as that goes. But at this point, you don't know what's become of Moses. Maybe he's dead. They have what we all have: doubt. Doubt is a natural human thing, and it is encouraged by Satan, the enemy. And when we sit here and we think, where is God in my life, and what happened, and is he real? And for a while there, it seemed like everything was good, but now things are a little bit iffy, and so we begin to make up substitutes. Doubt is the opposite of faith or trust. When our faith gets weak, when we begin to doubt God, then our doubts grow and our faith diminishes, our trust diminishes, and then we start looking for substitutes in other areas. And that's what happened with the case of these people. Now, doubt is something that's natural, particularly when you're just starting out, as you are and as they were. But we need to learn these lessons pretty quickly. Wait for God. He is trustworthy. You can count on him every single time. And you need to make sure that you encourage one another to do that. The second thing this is it was not only just a failure in faith or trust in God, but it was a failure in leadership. See, Aaron felt the pressure with everyone kind of gathered around him and intimidating him. But when Moses writes about it, Moses says that he saw that Aaron let the people go wild. You see, leaders to look out for the flock. And you don't just like parents don't let their kids run wild and run out into the street when they're little bitty kids, and they don't let people get into trouble that they know they're prone to get into at a certain age. So leaders of a church and leaders of these people, you don't give complete freedom to a group of people, particularly when you know that they're still young in the faith. They can't survive it. So you look out for them. Again and again in Israel's history, God gets upset with the shepherds or the elders or the leaders of the people because they're not looking out for the flock. Jesus said to Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. And that's what he's talking about. First, it was a failure of faith or trust, which caused doubt to go up. Secondly, it's a failure of leadership, which participated in it. And the third problem these people had, or interesting thing I want you to remember anyway, is about the Levites. When the Levites strapped on swords, they were given a very ugly challenge. Go throughout and kill people with the sword. That's a hard thing to do. Who can do that? Well, Abraham had done it. Abraham sacrificed his child. And now what we see is, again, another act that takes these people, and it uses an interesting phrase. It says, now that you've done this, you're set apart for Yahweh. Here's what the Levites did, and it's perfectly opposite of everything that's happened before. The Levites put God ahead of everything, even their own families and friends, ahead of peer pressure, ahead of social responsibilities, ahead of everything else. God first. And that's why they were able to do that. And that's why they were distinguished. It wasn't just because they killed people. It was because they trusted God more than even their own family relationships or anything else. They put their trust first in God, which is the exact opposite of everything that got them into trouble in the first place. Now we're going to see that grow throughout this, but as I've pointed out before, it's this trust or faith that made Moses different than the people. And they should have had their faith grow. The same thing is going to happen with us. As we first become Christians, we're going to face challenges that are going to cause us to doubt. And what we need to do is repent and get back with God again and understand that these things are normal to happen, but we need to start growing to the point where we just don't doubt God at all anymore. We absolutely can stand and trust on Him and Him alone. And we don't take other things and put God's name on it just because they're good. Here's the challenge I'm going to leave you guys with for a period of discussion now. To talk about what other kinds of things become gods in our lives. There are a variety of things. And I'm going to suggest these, and I'll give the handout to your teacher. An idol in our life, anything you trust. Anything you trust. Anything you worship. Anything you love. These are things that can become gods. How do you recognize these in your life? You recognize them this way. If I ask you a question, what could I take from you? What could I take that would freak you out? If I made you move to a different location, if I took something that you value a great deal, maybe it's your looks, maybe it's your friends, maybe it's your family, maybe whatever. I'm not talking about sadness and grief or loss. I'm talking about trust, things that you think you can't live now because you don't have those things. And those are substitutes for God. So you guys take those examples now and use that in your discussion, and hopefully you'll be able to identify the false gods in your life and not make the same mistake the Israelites made. Okay, see you next week. Bye.